Morning, this is Gail Christian, and welcome back to your Women's Circle, a program sponsored by the organization, your Women's Circle, that we hope you check out and decide hopefully to join us. As you know, this is International Women's Day, and it's part of Women's Month, and we have two guests that are appropriate to the occasion, two authors. The first is the writer Ronni Sanlo, who's here to talk about her new compilation on the LGBTQ community. And joining Ronni, who will be with her spouse, Kelly Watson, is our other author and our political and social editor, Alexis Veaux. Thank both of you for joining us this morning. Hey, look, start waving, Alexis.
That's there you go.
Love that hat, honey.
Love it too.
I know. Before we get started, I usually take the time to comment on something that I find of interest. And this morning, I think I found Oprah's interview last night with Meghan Markle of interest. And also, I found it a bit peculiar as to Meghan Markle choosing to join, in my opinion, probably one of the most notorious families in the history of the world in terms of its exploitation of people of color and, robbing Africa, Asia, Latin America, and anyone else they could get their hands on out of both their wealth and culture, and then deciding to marry into this family and then complaining about their lack of racial sensitivity. Well, they never had any, as far as I can tell. What they have is money and titles, and that really should be enough if you choose to join that group. But I'm not going to belabor that point. We're going to get right to the show. And we're going to talk about first to Ronni and Kelly. Good morning. Welcome. Glad that you are here.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Ronni Sanlo is a writer, playwright, educator, jack of all trades, publisher, and a sailor. Captain Ronni, welcome. We're glad you're here.
Thanks, Gail.
Your spouse is with you, Kelly Watson. Together, you produce film productions, and do you produce your plays together too?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And your plays together. And Kelly is a well-known social activist. I hang on your every word, Kelly. I didn't know that. This morning, we're going to talk about something very interesting. Ronni has written and published 4 volumes called This Day in LGBTQ History. And these volumes look at, Ronni, is it exclusively women?
No. It's all people who identify as LGBTQ, pan, non-binary, whatever. There are even a couple of allies thrown in.
So is this any and everything you ever wanted to know about queers? Is that a good subtitle?
Yeah, pretty much. And it goes day by day. Each volume is a 3-month section. So for example, this is volume 1. The graphic you just showed is volume 1, and it's out now. Volume 2 is out. Volume 3 and 4 are both still in production, but it goes by each day, and it could start, like on today's March 8th, so it could start in 5000 BC, anything that happened on March 8th all the way through the day before it was published in 2021.
Just open the book, turn to any page and read the entry so people can get some idea of the content.
Okay, so here's one. Sherry Harris, for example. She was an African-American woman who was elected to the Seattle City Council in 1991. And she is the first openly lesbian African-American woman elected to an office. So there's a piece in here about her.
What is it that you think the reader's going to get from this, or that you want them to get from these 4 volumes?
I want people to understand that we didn't pop out of a bar last Thursday night, that we have this long, rich history as LGBTQ people. And much of our history has been hidden, not written, just has never really been available. And so I've spent the last 10 years doing all of this research and gathering all these basically snippets. I mean, they're not long biographies, but they're snippets of things that have happened or people who have lived or places that we know about throughout history all the way to present day.
How do you make the cut? How did you decide who made the cut for the book?
I don't really have a cut. So as I find things, I include them. And now what's happening is people are sending me blurbs about other people who were known perhaps in their communities as movers and shakers and change agents. And they deserve to be in the next set of books.
So what you're saying is it's not only full of angels, it's full of snakes.
We've got some snakes. Yeah, we've got some murderers and thieves, and there's some pretty awful people.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. Do you have any favorites?
I do. I have to say, my favorite is really my all-time favorite is Mercedes de Acosta. Mercedes de Acosta lived from 1892 to 1968. And she was a writer, kind of a minor writer. I mean, she had some books published and a couple of her plays were produced, but none of them were like super popular. But she was known for sleeping with the most popular women of the early part of the 20th century. And at one point, so some of the women, I had a list here. She was Greta Garbo's lover, Alla Asimova, Isadora Duncan, Marlene Dietrich, Tallulah Bankhead. And she said that she could get any woman away from any man that she wanted. And this is great. Alice B. Toklas said of her, she said, "Say what you will about Mercedes, she's had the most important women of the 20th century." So, I mean, she's just amazing. So yeah, she's my favorite.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Let me ask you this. What is the ratio of men to women?
I have no idea.
Is it about equal, would you guess? Or is this?
I try to make it as equal as possible. Same with people of color, people from other countries as well. But I put in what I find. And I know that over time, like right now, there are a number of people who have just recently been elected to U.S. Congress who are lesbian or gay and people of color. And, last year, they wouldn't have been in my book if I had done the book last year. But this year, they're in the book. So because this year I know about them. Last year I didn't. So
knowing your work, this seems to be, a part of your desire to help identify and solidify LGBTQ culture, particularly lesbian culture. How important is that?
Okay, so here's the deal for me. I have a 26-year-old granddaughter who is pansexual and has been with a woman for the last 6 years. I have a 23-year-old granddaughter who's bisexual who has a boyfriend. I have an 11-year-old granddaughter who was born male. And I have a 7-year-old grandson who has a bunch of great role models. So for me, it's documenting the history of these children so that they know as they grow, they weren't the first, they're not going to be the last, they're not alone, and they can find reflections of themselves in these books.
The LGBT community is sort of a different kind of minority in so much as most racial minorities, religious, ethnic minorities, all have things in common. They tend to share a color, they share a history, they share ideas. This is a much more diverse group, the LGBT community. They're everything from, the far right to the far left, from white to black, from no religion to devout Catholics. How does that kind of a group find its identity?
I don't think it finds its identity particularly as a group other than we experience discrimination. And I think that's the piece that we all have in common. When there are, until the Equality Act is passed, which is making its way through Congress right now, and first introduced in 1975, by the way, until it's passed, we're not free. We don't have the same civil rights as other people. So that's really our common denominator. But in terms of our various social makeups, we're all so different. I mean, there are a lot of gay people I really don't like very much, and really don't want to, and have very little in common with. But there are others are my sisters and my brothers. And so, I just think it's important that I make no judgment about it. I'm documenting the history. I'm not writing the history. I'm documenting the history. And it's the history of all of us.
Read me another excerpt. Just pick a place in the book. I find this to be absolutely fascinating. I wish you could turn to a murderer or someone really gross. I love Mercedes, but
okay. Here's an interesting one. King Henry. Okay, talking about English royalty. In 1327, up until the 1300s, homosexuality really wasn't that big of a deal. But something happened, and nobody's really quite clear what it was in the 1300s, that all of a sudden it became taboo up through today. So King Edward II of England was a gay guy, and he had a lover, and people didn't like that he was openly gay. And so they killed his lover. Well, they arrested his lover, and they arrested him too. And they made him watch as they cut off the genitals of his lover. And then they were still so pissed off with Edward that he was murdered by having a red hot poker stuck up his butt.
I don't mean to laugh. I didn't mean to be that gross, Ronni, but I guess it proves the point.
It's still part of our history, no matter what, But here's a thing from 1934, Russia. Article 121 makes sex between men illegal in Russia, and so Gorky, who was a popular writer and leading Soviet intellectual of the time, praises the proletarian humanism of the law, which punishes sex between men, and puts them into prison for a minimum of 5 years. So I mean, there's just lots of interesting little blurbs. Here's a thing about in 1886, Nikola Tesla. What people are driving around in Teslas now, and there's a new company called Nikola. So there's a thing in here about Nikola Tesla, about where he was likely asexual. Well, there are a lot of people who are asexual, so I put a couple of asexuals in here. So he never married. He explained that his chastity was helpful in his scientific abilities. Perhaps.
That's one way to put it. Let me ask you. Oh, well, no, let me not ask you anything. Let you tell me this. Where can I get this book? I'm anxious. I want it right now.
Amazon.com. It's on. You can get a paperback copy on Amazon. You can get a Kindle copy, and I haven't started doing this yet. But if you want a signed copy, let me know, and you can buy it directly from me. But I'd really rather wait until we meet in person sometime.
And how much does it cost?
$14.99. I really tried to keep them, even though my costs are more than that. I really tried to keep the cost down. So right now, $14.99.
There are 2 available now, and the next 2 coming, one in the summer and one in the fall?
Correct.
Let me ask you in terms of how does this reflect where we are now? I mean, should I read this volume 1 and feel like, wow, life is certainly so much better for me than it was then?
I think you would read it and say, wow, life is so much more interesting, because I understand that people like me existed long before I was aware. Part of this for me, Gail, is when I was a kid, I knew by the time I was 11 that I was a lesbian. I'd fallen in love with Annette Funicello, the best Mouseketeer ever. And so I began searching for reflections of myself because I thought I was the only person that felt that way. And when I looked in the libraries, I would find books on strong women, ironically, Margaret Mead and Eleanor Roosevelt and Babe Didrikson, all of whom it turned out are lesbians, but the books didn't say that. But I was drawn to these strong women. But I could never find anything that said they were in love with other women. And so by the time I got to UCLA as director of the LGBT Center there, I developed a library. I created a 400 square foot library with hundreds upon hundreds of volumes so that students would always have a place to go to find a reflection of themselves. And that's really the whole purpose of all of this. I think the bottom line purpose is these are volumes in which we can find reflections of ourselves and find out a little bit about the lives of the people on whose shoulders we stand.
Kelly, you're sitting there looking all cute. I think I'd like to let you get in here on this conversation. Why don't you weigh in on what Ronnie's talking about?
You know, it's been, Ronni and I met about 12 years ago, and I had been sort of oblivious to the history of the LGBT community. I didn't come out till I was 32 years old. And so it's definitely as well as all the loving, wonderful things that have happened in our relationship, it's been educational for me. And what Ronni just said, that sense of history, like this struggle has been going on for a long time, and yet we are preceded by some really brave people. I recently read the story of Marty Mann, who was an amazing lesbian who started the National Council on Alcoholism. And, you know, the courage of people like that. So I just so affirm Ronnie's work in getting the history published where people can access it easily has been really, really important, I think.
And Kelly's work in producing, being the executive producer of a number of films over the last few years that, you know, most of which depict our history. And they're just critical, and they couldn't have been made without her support.
Tell me something, Anita Bryant, the play, Anita Bryant, which I think, you know, most people looking at the two of you now associate you with the play. What's up with the play? Tell people about it.
Yeah, great. The play, about a year ago, I rewrote it for Zoom production, and a number of theaters around the country picked it up over the last year. So we've actually had the play pretty well produced around the country, which has been kind of cool. But then people always say, well, you know, where can I see it now? Whatever. So I decided that I think I want to have it filmed and filmed as a Zoom production and make it available on my website, you know, and certainly you and I, Gail, have talked about creating a joint project to present this as part of your programming, which I would be just honored when that happens. That would be amazing. So we're in the process now of trying to determine, you know, how we're going to move forward in making that happen.
And tell people, what's the title of that program? I just called it Anita Bryant. That's not the name.
It's Dear Anita Bryant.
Dear Anita Bryant. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank both of you. You're both wonderful. You are certainly very important parts of lesbian, I almost said history.
It's just because we love you and you know it. So. lesbian culture, and your work is very important to this community. And thank you so much for coming on. And next time you're on, we're going to talk about the boat. How about that, Kelly? Okay.
And your attempt to assail Kelly around the world to foreign ports.
Well, I want to add one more thing, if you don't mind. We are the executive producers of a film that's just coming out called Miss Lillian.
That's right.
And it's about it's the life of Jimmy Carter's mother, President Jimmy Carter's mother, who was truly an amazing, powerful woman, so ahead of her time, and so anti-racist. and the power of her anti-racism just is pulled through this entire film. It's powerful.
Well, do you think she's a lesbian?
No.
So it's the first production we've done of a straight person. All our previous productions have involved either lesbians. So we broadened our horizons, but we don't plan to stay there. But it's a great story.
It's a great story.
Well, I can't say you heard it here. Miss Lillian's a lesbian. That's not.
No.
Thank you.
Though, I'll tell you.
Thank you for joining us this morning. It's always delightful seeing the two of you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Gail.
Thank you very much. Remember, this program is brought to you by Your Women's Circle. It's a business, professional, social organization for women who stay connected, get together to meet other women, talk about business, and it's the dues from this organization that supports this program. So look at the website and consider becoming a member. It's fun, it's interesting, it's entertaining. We're now going to move on to our editors, our editor for the day, which is the always fabulous Alexis Veaux.
Good morning.
Hey, honey.
Good morning, darling. How are you?
Each of our shows, at the end of the show, will have an editor who talks about everything from entertainment to the stock market. Alexis is our social and political editor, and we couldn't have chosen a more fabulous person or a smarter, more intellectually interesting person. As you can tell, I'm an Alexis Veaux fan. So what's up, honey?
Good morning, darling. First of all, happy International Women's Day.
Thank you.
All women, all genders, all around the world. I'm really happy to be with you today, Gail, because I've been thinking about what other narratives came out of the 2020 election, other than the big one that has us all consumed. But what were some of the other narratives that came out of that election? And when I start to think about it more and dig into it more, I discovered that there are now 11 LGBTQ people who were elected this year at the local, actually, it's 11 who went to Congress. But there were some 200 odd LGBTQ people who won their elections in the 2020 elections, including them. And let me shout out to New York for electing Richie Torres, who identifies as Afro-Latinx, and Mondaire Jones, who identifies as Black. They're both gay men. Also, Crystal Hudson, they went to the House. And Crystal Hudson, who became a member of the New York City Council. So, and we've seen people like Sharice Davids. I believe Sharice is a representative from Kansas. So there's this sense of growing political presence in terms of LGBTQ candidates. So I'm thinking about that today because I'm also thinking about two things that are happening today that are really present for us. One is that the police officer, whose name I will not say, but we know who this person is, who shot and killed George Floyd, his trial begins today. And two, and I believe that's in Minneapolis, and two, President Biden announced that he's forming this gender council on gender equality and equity, and also a vehicle for looking at sexual harassment in the field of education. So these things in my mind get tied together. On the one hand, we have this heightened political presence of people who represent LGBTQ communities. On the other hand, we have what's happening with our own social lives in terms of Black Lives Matter, racial justice movements, the climate movement, the environmental movement, the economic, pandemic, the health pandemic. So there are all these ways that our particular lives are being impacted in the streets, in our communities, in our families, in our individual and sovereign bodies. And so what will it mean for us going forward with this sense of a heightened political presence? What will that mean? How's that going to impact, will it impact the movement to raise the minimum wage level from where it is to $15 an hour? And let's understand that if somebody does make $15 an hour, it's not like they're getting rich. It's not, their annual income is, going to be somewhere in the area of $30,000. That's not rich. But again, what will these current social moments do? How can we think about them? The trial of the officer who shot and killed, who stood on the neck of George Floyd until he died. At the federal level, the president wanting to create, dare I say, yet another commission. But certainly, he wants to fulfill his campaign promises. What will this do for us? And I think it bears repeating. What will this do for us in terms of the everyday? What can we expect, and what should we demand? Should we see something like the squad happening? Because these 11 people who were elected during the 2020 elections constitute the largest number of LGBTQ people in political office in U.S. history, all at one time.
Let me ask you a question. What would you like to see happen because of this new LGBTQ presence? Do you want to see the queer squad? Absolutely.
I want to see a consolidation of that presence. I want to see the person who got elected in Kansas, the persons who got elected in New York, the persons who got elected in Wisconsin, Arizona. Yes, I do want to see that. I do think that we need to consolidate that power or presence. We need to, and let me add this too, and here's another reason why we need to consolidate that. There's something called the Victory Fund. The Victory Fund endorses LGBTQ candidates for political office. And they endorsed in the last election more than 330 odd people, of which more than 220 something were elected. So there is this sense that there's a vehicle for consolidation, particularly at the level of endorsement. Now that we are there, what are we going to do with it? So yes, I would like to see a squad. I would like to see, and the 11 people are all Democrats. The 11 people who got elected during the 2020 elections are all Democrats.
What about Republicans? Were any of these people Republicans?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
And that's not to say that there aren't Republicans who are LGBTQ working in political offices. One of the things I find interesting about the Victory Fund is that it endorses openly LGBTQ candidates. And that, I think, again, is a particular way of looking at the moment, because there have been people elected to political office who did not come out while they served, or came out and or were outed after they served.
Alexis, we've run out of time. I could talk to you for another hour, but this time I won't, as I did last time. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for bringing that hat with you.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure, and take care, and we'll see you soon.
Good to see you. Thank you.
Good to see you. I'd like to say before we close that we're going to take a hiatus. Two things are happening. I personally need a tune-up, an oil change, and a lube job. And while I do that, we're going to take a hiatus from the show for a couple of weeks to assess what we've done and assess where we're going in the future. And we would love to hear from you if you've got any ideas how to make all of this better. Thank you so much for joining us. And we encourage you to join your Women's Circle, the organization whose dues pays for this program. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. We'll see you back in a few weeks.